what happens in an absolute scenario that Bitcoin becomes actually the monetary asset of the world, right? I personally think it's the best monetary fuel cell that was ever invented by a human being, right? Everything else deteriorates with time. Bitcoin doesn't deteriorate with time. So you asked me if I was a gold bug, right?
Yeah.
So the first time I heard about Bitcoin was after 2009. So I was at Merrill in 2009, right?
Okay.
So I went through the collapse of Merrill. I can write a book just about that that period of time, which was insane. I remember like going on a Friday home and my boss just calling me back. It's like, come back to the bank because we're going to be sold this week. And Merrill, is broke and we have to find a solution. We have to reprice all your books. And that weekend was insane. That's an famous weekend where Merrill was sold to Bank of America, right? On a prearranged deal, and all of that happened. But after 2009, right, I already didn't have a lot of confidence in the system, and that my confidence level in the system just went down, like one order of magnitude, right? And I remember at the time there was this guy that I used to read a lot who was a gold bug, John Malden.
Okay.
And John Malden had, something that he called Thoughts from the Frontline. He published a newsletter. He published, I don't remember if it was every week or every month, but I love his newsletter because it started by going out and saying about the different things about the government, why government spending is a problem, right? And he was a gold bug. His solution initially was gold. And then back in 2000, I think this was 2015, 2016, he switched and it's like, listen, I've been talking about gold for all this time. There's this new thing that for me is digital gold, which is Bitcoin. And I have heard about Bitcoin before, like on the tech side, but never really paid attention to it because I thought, just like you, I thought, oh, this is funny internet money, gamers use for different things. I shouldn't be investing in this. But when he mentioned Bitcoin, then I looked at it, I think, a little bit more seriously. And I remember this was right before Mt. Gox happened. So the price was around like $1,000. And I look it up, my first reaction, oh, I missed the boat. This thing's already $1,000, Too late, I'm not gonna buy anything. And forgot about it. And I think a few months later, Mt. Gox happened. And the price went from like 1,000 to like 300. Mm-hmm. And then the trade run kicked in. And I don't understand anything about this thing, but it just went from 1,000 to $300. I'm gonna buy a little bit just to see as a quick trade, right? And then that was the first time that I bought Bitcoin. And of course, it went from 300 to 600. I sold everything. I felt I was a genius, right? And it took me years to go back and, rebuy. So very similar to your story. I think everybody has to go through some sort of It's very rare the person that comes into Bitcoin and sees it as a monetary asset that they're going to put in their balance sheet, that they're going to hold for a long period of time. You usually have to go through these cycles because it takes time for the real understanding to kick in, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it genuinely takes years to really get it.
Definitely.
I don't think when I was buying it in early 2017, I bought a few Bitcoin in early 2017. I didn't really know what I was buying because if I had, I would have bought a lot more. I had the capital to do it. And I think, you never really fully get it. That's one thing.
Yeah, I still don't think I understand it.
Totally.
But I would say it's only been probably since about, I would say my best learning period was probably the start of the bull and the bear market this most recent cycle. So from about 2020. And that's after 3 years of doing a podcast, when things started to click from the outside world into the Bitcoin world and vice versa, which by the way is why this interview is really important because a lot of the conversations me and Danny are having now are about capital allocation, long-term investment, thinking about where we should be putting our sats, how we use them. So, but I do think it takes people a long time. And I also have got this theory that there's never a time when you buy Bitcoin and the time you're buying it, it seems cheap. So
no,
the
always feels expensive.
the £80 Bitcoin I bought, my first one, I spent £80 for some numbers on the screen. I was like, this is expensive. Yep. And when I was buying it for £600 at the start of 2017, very expensive. Even when it dropped from $69,000 to $15,500, it felt expensive. Yep. Today, every single Bitcoin purchase feels expensive, which I think is a good thing, by the way. But there's no point I'm like, oh, it's cheap today.
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit about, how to price Bitcoin. And, how do you know if the price you're getting is expensive or cheap, right? And I think finally we're getting into somewhere where we can have an idea if it's cheap or not, right? And that's based on different scenarios, right? I say, okay, so what happens in an absolute scenario that Bitcoin becomes actually the monetary asset of the world, right? I personally think it's the best monetary fuel cell that was ever invented by a human being, right? Everything else deteriorates with time. Bitcoin doesn't deteriorate with time. So you do your work, I always get the example of my father. My father is a doctor, right? So I remember him working, saving a little bit of money at the end of the month, right? And then putting on checking account, on savings account. When he accumulated a little bit more, he would buy, a small apartment maybe, right, as a saving. But he always struggled. And then he had to get into stocks and bonds and where do I put my money? Because you're always swimming against the current, right? If you stay stopped, if you just left the money sitting on his checking account, right, that he knew, again, by being a Brazilian, that value, maybe not overnight, maybe not in 10 years, in 1 year, but in 10 years, that money's pretty much gone. In 20 years, it's 100% gone for sure, right?
Well, listen, when I was just out in Buenos Aires, I was making my film. One of the people I interviewed said everybody is a financial director. Everybody. So we went to dinner. There were 6 of them, and they were all explaining about 30% of their time is where do they put their money?
Planning.
Yeah, financial planning. Where do I put my money? What do I buy? Do I buy dollars? How do I get those dollars? Do I buy stock? They just have to get rid of their pesos as quickly as possible.
Think about the economic impact of that, right? A doctor should be practicing seeing patients, right? And no, he's spending 20, 30% of his time investing and looking to investments, right? When he shouldn't be doing that.
Of course not.
If the proof of work that he did represented in the monetary assets that he built was not getting debased a long time, right? People need to do that, again, because they need to fight against the system. And they don't understand the reason why that happens, right? It's very simple because you have somebody somewhere that can literally just bring, he has to work, 24/7 to actually accumulate dollars or reais or whatever it is. Meanwhile, the government can just literally press a button and accumulate the same amount that he did without any work. So the ethics of Bitcoin is another thing that, when you look at, I think it's the first money that it's ethical money, right? It's completely ethical. There is no advantage. The US government wants to buy Bitcoin. They're going to have to buy Bitcoin. They're going to take it out of the hands of other hodlers, right? To actually accumulate it, unless they confiscate, which is a problem, right? But if they want to accumulate, by the traditional ways, they can mine like other miners. They can compete for the Bitcoins, but it's a fair system to get exposure to it.